nobody is talking about this at all. I mean, yeah, I get it, because Max Verstappen's sounding off, Aston Martin's looking incredibly shaky, as well as Mercedes, actually. But we've got ourselves a bit of a political boxing match between two legacy teams, folks, and I'm not talking about Mercedes or Red Bull. McLaren versus Ferrari, a rivalry that should endure for all time, because when either one is missing from the battlefield, F1 just feels wrong. I've said this for a while now. And this year, they're already at odds over something quite basic, actually: how the race even starts. And it might actually lead to many members of the Tifosi having a sense of optimism, and something they might actually get a little bit of fun out of. The fact that Ferrari, Fred Vasseur mainly, has managed to get under Andrea Stella's skin. Because a short view back to the past, gentlemen and gentle ladies, we saw the start line procedures at the end of day 3 of Bahrain testing, and it was a little bit alarming. After the sight of Franco Colapinto nearly kissing the wall at the start, and Oscar Piastri failing to get off the grid, the paddock's shared nightmare now is the very start of the race. That being said though, it wasn't quite as alarming, because we found out from various sources that it was all down to various communications errors or mistimings, as in, one person was following that car, one car was given a specific mission to not do anything until something else happened, so okay, fair enough. I, and myself you, my fine fellow for watching this video, understand that this is just part of the process of learning. But as we all know, optics and perceptions matter, and what we saw right there to the untrained eye would make it look like the start of an actual race looks incredibly fragile right now. Especially when you then couple it to that now infamous clip of Sam Collins doing a pit lane report, and then Lewis Hamilton rocks up next to him talking about the Ferrari starts being faster than the others, and then Lewis does the complete opposite, and you see the pained expression on Sam's face. The chatter, it's all mounting up, folks, because everyone has a new hybrid brain to try and manage, and the formula is headed toward it. And that in of itself has gotten people debating about whether F1's even the same thing anymore. And there's also the fact that the old MGUH part is now gone. The bit that helped keep the turbo responsive. And then you might be wondering, well, why on earth was that thing removed if it's causing all of these problems? Well, it was down to the grounds of it not being road relevant, and the FIA very much likes to have technology which is somewhat relatable to the driver and can easily be scaled down to the consumer. The MGUH, whilst it was a very nifty tool, did prove to be very problematic and very expensive to run, so it's not there anymore. So what is a team to do? Well, can you rely on the MGUK more, the battery side of things? Well, not quite, because there is a rule within the rules saying that the MGUK, that's half of the power unit, cannot be used unless the car is going faster than 50 kilometers an hour, which is slightly over 30 miles an hour to anyone who doesn't use that metric. So just getting off the line, you can only use the combustion side of the power unit. You're left relatively hamstrung. And now it's become a growing cause for concern, atop of all of the stuff that Max Verstappen has been saying, that Formula 1 is basically Formula E on steroids. So what is the FIA to do? Itself already embroiled in the compression ratio saga. Well, it's got sort of two levers that it can push in this situation. It can either change the physics or it can change the process. And the fight that we have right here between Ferrari and McLaren is about which lever gets pulled. Because now we can see much more, and it's not like the shakedown where things are being censored to make F1 look good. We are noticing this weird pre-race ritual where we're seeing the cars just revving the nuts off of themselves for about 10 seconds or so, and it just looks like it's a whole lot of nothing. Where the turbo, the revs, the clutch bite and battery state all need to be in the right place before you can actually go. But for me, it's not totally alien, because quite frankly, I remember the days in the 90s and 2000s when we just see the cars rock up to the starting grid, the V10s would just go completely nuts whilst the lights go out, and then you're suddenly on your way. Especially so when you had traction control. So it doesn't really bother me in that way in terms of the sound, but in terms of the procedure, it is a little bit janky. Was this not thought about in the first place? Well, if you look in the headlines, it might have been brought up this time last year by Ferrari of all people. But it might have been the classic situation like we had with the Braun double diffuser, where it was brought to everyone's attention, people didn't really take it seriously, so the original party went with it, save for a couple of outliers like Williams and Toyota. And what makes this really spicy is that the front of the grid can have all the time in the world if they want to, but the back of the grid, they could just rock up to the back, and before they know it, the light sequence happens so fast they are left frantically potentially pushing buttons and whatnot to manage everything. So we might actually see chaos as far down as 14th or something like that, because there's a lot more going on in 14th than there is in 4th place. So that's why McLaren are choosing to lean hard on the safety angle, because the FIA, they really can't shrug that off by design. Andrea Stella calling a procedural tweak imperative? It's a pressure move, from the defending champions to boot. If there's a pile-up caused by confused launches, the governing body owns that particular headline. It's an argument that can force a procedural change without admitting you got caught napping, which I personally think McLaren did easily find themselves napping. And it does make me think this will actually go through, because you know the whole thing about red flags, you can change your tyres underneath red flag conditions, and people are going, well, why on earth can you do that? It's a free pit stop. Well, every single time that conversation comes up, the FIA just swats it away saying, safety, that's why. But despite all of that though, what McLaren's trying to insist here is not necessarily a change in the actual rules in terms of the engine, because as we've been seeing with the Mercedes thing, that's going through absolute hell and back in terms of rigmarole and drama. No, what they're talking about here is a change in the start line procedure, in just making things last a little bit longer, so that means the guys at the back can do everything they need to do before the lights actually go out and everyone can get away relatively fine. So that means you don't have a mixture of stalled cars, bogged down cars, or worse, potential crashes. But like I said earlier, what makes this really interesting is that one of their rivals, Ferrari, which has been really inconspicuous throughout all of the testing that we've seen so far, reportedly blocked this change in the start line procedure when it was first brought up, when everyone started to realise it was actually going to be a problem. It's not a throwback to the days where the FIA was funnily also known as Ferrari International Assistance. Nor did they get lucky or anything with their car's design or anything like that. No. They reportedly built for this eventuality, and they're protecting it after allegedly bringing this to the team's attention, but nobody really took it up. And in this particular 2026 episode, Ferrari anticipated it would be important, and teams wouldn't go as far as blocking a change unless they believed it would raise an advantage. If you made concept compromises to be good at starts under the written rules, you don't want the rules suddenly being rewritten to rescue people who didn't. Again, similar to the situation with Mercedes and the engine compression ratio. They came up with something innovative, the other teams may not have. Red Bull might have thought of that they could, but then they didn't. So everyone's screaming that they, Mercedes, are cheaters because they came up with something smart, and we've now got that whole particular situation going on. This might be a similar thing with Ferrari and McLaren, albeit on a slightly lower scale or higher scale. It depends where you compare the start to a fundamental engine rule. But I suppose it could actually be more dramatic because it's something that we actually see, and we don't want to have a situation where it was in F2 in 2024, an absolute buster cluck. With clutches burning out and everything. Well, okay, Law, what's the exact advantage then? Well, I'm not an engineer, nor do I work for Ferrari because I don't have the Italian accent or anything like that. No. It does suggest that they managed to find something which could reduce the potential of turbo lag, meaning they don't necessarily have to rev the nuts off the engine every single time. One potential scenario could be that they came up with a concept of the power unit which would reduce turbo lag and map torque delivery, so that means the biting of the clutch, as in the clutch and then go, would be a bit more forgiving, so the car is a little bit more predictable at the exact moment when the driver's trying to juggle 10 other things. In short, Ferrari might have designed a car which is a little bit more agreeable at low speeds, where they can actually trust it a little more, so it just won't do massive amounts of wheel spin, or potentially not start at all. Something that a combustion engine can work with. But then again, it makes me wonder about the station hairpin around Monaco. That can get close to 50 kilometers an hour, so, squeaky bum time in that regard. What will happen with the MG UK? Will it just cut out, or is it just off limits? But this all ties back to the thing I sort of mentioned in my Aston Martin video, and the Williams video, quite a few actually, that the whole situation in 2026, the thing that could absolutely win it for teams is if they get on top of the systems. It's not necessarily a peak power problem or anything like that. If you can understand the system, then you could stand to gain things, as well as having fewer surprises. And if Ferrari can have fewer surprises off the line, then that will stand them in good stead. Because there are other elements brought up by other teams, such as amassing battery power over the course of a lap and having a solid platform which is reliable to read for nearly every single lap. And the start line procedure, well, that's another example which two big teams are bringing to light and are willing to fight over. McLaren is doing what any smart champion would do, especially when their car right now doesn't look like a hot ticket at the start of 2026. They said they got a lot of work to do, especially when it comes to weight. And that is to pick the argument the referee cannot ignore. Just bring up the word safety, even though, quite frankly, this just feels like competitive self-defense, as in McLaren have realised that they've got something a bit tricky. Piastri said that this is a recipe for disaster. Norris isn't exactly too sure of the situation, and both of them are trying to gun for a world championship, Norris getting his second, Piastri having another fair shot at his first. And right now, their rivals Ferrari are looking a little bit more sedate and a little bit more, composed. And something as good as a start, it could wipe out getting pole position. It may not count for toffee. because Ferrari might qualify 4th or something like that, but then if they can get off the start a little bit quicker, they'll be right up there in 1st, and further down the road, they might be out of the gap where you can use overtake mode in, and then it would be done. The only thing you'd be left having if you were in pole position and you were suffering that, then you just have that cute little trophy Pirelli gives you, and of course a statistic in an F1 stats book. And that's something I really want to bring to your attention here, because the Ferrari we're seeing right now look really confident in not really doing anything. They really seem chilled and relaxed. And that could be a really big confidence boost for the drivers, Fred, the employees, the crews around them, as well as the fans, which have been suffering blow after blow in 2025, and it all began from the very moment they got that double disqualification in China. It's not been a good year for Ferrari fans now, has it? That being said, Fred is absolutely fine with nobody seemingly noticing, because, well, look at the distractions around them. You've got Max Verstappen out here calling the new cars anti-racing, which is both a headline machine and a genuine driver complaint about how energy management now dominates the experience. And given this is Max Verstappen, it makes me think that there are going to be quite a few amendments for the 2027 regulations in that regard to make it a bit less anti-racing. Then there's Aston Martin going through a literal slow-motion crisis, what with their delayed activation of their car. And even though Lance Stroll claims to not see the sky falling, his comments speak otherwise, whilst Fernando Alonso is busy trying to do some diplomatic morale boosting, actually trying to diagnose the problem. Basically, it's a complete mess over at Aston Martin, and Fernando's actually being the sane one. But quite frankly, I think Honda is wishing they could go back in time to 2015, because I just can imagine that Papa Stroll is tearing into them something awful. Ron Dennis in 2015 sounds probably a little bit more of a cozy teddy bear. Then, of course, there's all of the stuff that Mercedes is embroiled in with the political fire of the compression ratio, which has cooled down a little bit, but it's still ongoing. It's not really clear what Mercedes is doing, what with them talking about Red Bull being the benchmark, trying to distract everyone from what's going on with their engine, and Mercedes admitting they've taken a step back in Bahrain, just trying to take the heat that they won't necessarily be dominant. And admittedly, it has been consuming our watch time over the winter, although I do expect a conclusion very soon. So cut back to Ferrari, and you got Fred openly admitting that it's mega good that nobody's talking about them because it lets them stay focused. Fair enough if it's a pattern. Because this winter, they look like a team that's trying to win by being boring in all the places that used to be very, very frenetic. They've now, as of recording, got the highest lap count of any team in pre-season testing, eclipsing Mercedes, and there's been no real upsets in terms of reliability either. Sure, their drivers have had plenty to say when it comes to the rules, and them thinking it's complete mental gymnastics, and that Leclerc thinks it's going to be absolute bedlam at the starts, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they absolutely hate the regulations as much as Max Verstappen does. What they're just saying, Lewis and Charles, is it's just a lot more work than they're used to. But on the whole, when it comes to the actual driving, they've been just getting on with it with no real dramas. Lewis actually seeing some positives in the car, saying it's actually quite a bit of fun. Even though that is also muddled with the cars being slower than GP2 cars, he claims. And then with Leclerc, bit of a harder read actually. So with what Ferrari might have cooked up, it might give Lewis and Charles a little bit less mental load at the start, and if they can have a really good start, that might be absolutely beneficial for their races, because you can win or lose a lot at the actual start, because if you get your systems wrong, that's a 5-second time penalty, me old son, and then your race is completely ruined. Because this season is about software and procedure, maybe even more than actual downforce. And, of course, you've got Hamilton calling the rules ridiculously complex and worrying that fans won't even understand what they're actually watching. And with him being who he is, that does go hand in hand with Verstappen's comments too. Leclerc has also warned about early season bedlam, and basically hints that the systems are going to decide things rather than the driver in certain scenarios. And you might be wondering why I decide to bring all of that up, because I'm actually trying to speak up in terms of Ferrari's actual hopes for the season, not trying to talk them down. Well, don't worry, all things will become clear later on in this video, so hang in there. Because if Ferrari's been able to find this trick, which can at least try and reduce what's going on at the very beginning of the race for their drivers, that will give them a little bit of extra headspace to think what they can actually do going into the opening lap and, of course, turn 1. Not to mention all of the lifting and coasting algebra they'll have to do over the course of the race in terms of battery management, which Ferrari does seem to have a fairly good handle at. The car and engine seem reliable. And let's be real, both Ferraris have plenty of experience of lifting and coasting. You know, the whole Lyco thing, albeit for different reasons to do with the plank. This time around, it's a fundamental thing with the battery and the power unit and the engine and the combustion side. But okay, you probably want a little bit of proof as to whether Ferrari actually has a good car instead of just having a good start line process. I hear you, don't worry. There is some evidence in that regard too. Although, if you are a tifoso, what I have said thus far is a bit of a crumb of comfort. Because Ferrari had been bringing upgrades during the Bahrain test with a noticeably reworked front wing, plus floor-related changes being documented. So yeah, that's quite punchy. Albeit not as punchy as the Audi sidepods, which, based on their shape, looks like somebody has punched the sides of them in like some kind of dough. And then multiple outlets are pointing to Ferrari looking strong on race simulations too. A report citing Sky Sports pit lane analysis saying Ferrari's long runs were the quickest, with Hamilton's run on the final day the fastest race simulation of anybody. Even rival team leadership is reportedly looking at the data and treating Ferrari as a reference. Yet Ferrari, they're quite happy to keep their head down and not talk about it, or join the choir of criticisms to the degree of many other drivers. So, you see there? I'm tying it back in. Remember who they hired to partner Leclerc? Sir Lewis, of Mercedes fame. A sandbagging master outfit. They know what to do when it comes to talking themselves down. Remember all of the years of domination under Lewis Hamilton, when you'd hear him on the radio say, "No, my tire's gone, man," and then he would go on to win the race, like how Max Verstappen would complain about the brakes, and then he would go on to win the championship. This is classic sandbagging 101, and Ferrari are more than happy to wield it, especially with all of the other stuff going on, because even though we keep saying it's just testing, bro, people do look to lap times. So with Ferrari, they've not been acting as the standouts from the very beginning, which is what Mercedes have been doing. We all looked to that 500 lap count from the shakedown and thought, oh, well, that's it, it's absolutely over. Oh, they've got so much headspace in their minds, they can think about performance in Bahrain solely. Well, look where they are right now. They have again said that they've gone backwards and they have found some issues with, again, balance and dealing with temperatures, so they've not gotten rid of that. Whereas Ferrari, they've just been going from strength to strength, slowly tracking upwards to the point where they can bring a meaningful upgrade package, which seems to have done a good amount of service. And let's not forget all of the other reports that we've seen from various media outlets that this might not be the final spec of Ferrari. This is just the Spec A machine that we're seeing. We might see the Spec B further along. There have been also reports that there might be some big upgrades for Australia, but I wouldn't be surprised that further down the line, we might see a really completely different SF26 once it's gotten through all of the FIA crash tests and the homologation and all of the other procedures, and getting, of course, the data from all of the testing and the initial races with the Spec A car, whether or not it's actually worth to pull the plug and go for the B. And that has caught the attention of Andrea Stella, who actually also admitted that, yes, right now, Ferrari do look really good with their long runs and that they are actually a team to be reckoned with. It's gone straight back to 2024 when it was McLaren versus Ferrari. So, yeah, I don't want to say Ferrari are so back or it's so their year, but at least they're going to have a fairly good start to it, so much better than they had in 2025. And wouldn't you know it, in that very same breath, Stella's imploring the FIA to do something and think of the children, in this case the children being the 22 drivers on the grid, as well as saving the sport from ridicule. And the FIA, Formula One, oh, they are very sensitive to those two chestnuts. Don't get me wrong, this shouldn't be ignored entirely, because drivers did report confusion and near misses, which is the sort of thing the FIA would have also seen and taken into account in their own way, with their own eyes, and behind closed doors. But at the same time, Ferrari did raise the alarm a year ago, but nobody noticed, so they shouldn't be punished. And now they're out here saying, hey, we've done the hard work, so don't bow to peer pressure now, FIA, come on. Sort of what Mercedes are doing. So who wins here? Well, if Nicholas Tombassis wants to avoid round one being dominated by protests and awkward starts and embarrassing noise from social media, I think the compromise writes itself. Just change the timing and procedure, not the physics. So you remember the levers I talked about earlier? So instead of pulling the one where they change the rules where the MGUK can be used at all times or anything like that, or they come up with some extra additional to the power unit where you can use it at low running speeds, just have it so that means things just take that little bit longer. That seems to be the only compromise. Ferrari have obviously come up with something really nifty, so they should be rewarded for that. And then, of course, the other teams will try and figure it out, and we'll, of course, see it all compressed together in the full course of time. It would at least reduce the risk of cars stalling on the grid because they've not gone through the process, or there's not enough power after spooling up the turbos, or the cars just get off really, really slowly. But it still doesn't tackle the fact that this is a fundamental oversight that teams ultimately ignored, that they should be chastised for this. They didn't take Ferrari's word seriously. They were onto something, so Ferrari should get the pat on the head and say, well done, you thought about it. But even if they do change the procedure, the Ferrari will still be the better car in terms of how it composes itself at slow speeds. It will just get off the line that little bit more straightforwardly. So this particular facet of what's going on with 2026, and this being potentially yet another protest that we may see, this is not going to be the last one either, shows that Ferrari has got something with this car. Like how Toto believes that his Mercedes has something to it after the wilderness years of 2022 through 2025. They believe that they're back, Ferrari believe that they're back on the straight and narrow, that they won't be one of the big four that falls to one of the midfield teams. Right now, it seems to be Haas, who are the dark horses and the best of the rest. And I'm so tempted at this moment to proclaim Charles Leclerc as my predicted champion in 2026. But I'm going to hold my horses in that regard just that little bit longer because we've still got one more test session to go through. So do subscribe to the channel for when my actual season prediction drops and you'll get my actual answer. But in any case, this just seems to be the whole start line drama, another hint to what the big theme of 2026 will be. How Formula One looks and feels going into the latter half of the 2020s, now that we've got electrification playing a bigger part in the actual sport and the drama, and of course the theatrics and the entertainment. The starts are one of the few moments where a small technical decision can turn into an outsized sporting outcome. You need a car that goes when you tell it to go, and one that you can trust not to bug out on you without expecting a time penalty to be handed to you. And McLaren right here, they're lobbying. That's what they're doing, because they're scared of chaos and Ferrari. And in response, Ferrari are blocking any sort of response to and change the procedures because they've already done the homework and they think that that homework is about to pay them back in spades. And tell the world and their fans that last year, yeah, it was absolutely painful, but it was a temporary setback. Nothing to worry about here. Nothing to do with the fact that they changed 90% of the car 1 year before a regulation change. Why on earth did they do that when the SF24 was just that good? 14 points off winning the Constructors. As for Lewis and Charles, what are their actual reads here? Do they think they have something here? Well, one thing we can actually say is that they definitely believe that these cars are going to be more taxing on their brains than they had been in previous years. That's what they're saying. They've not said that these cars are terrible or that they're really difficult to drive. Again, Hamilton said they are an improvement. They are more entertaining to drive. They might actually have a better chance of giving him something in qualifying. And in the light of all of that, if the Ferrari does produce, as Leclerc said, less chaos, then all the better for them. And it just goes to show that I think every single team believes that they have that magic bullet that will save them in this new regulation cycle. Because Aston Martin, well, they clearly believe that the aero will save the day with Adrian Newey. Williams believe that the suspension and how the energy is managed through said suspension will win the day because they've gone with pull rod suspension, which none of the other major teams have done. Only Alpine and Cadillac have chosen to go down that route as well as Williams. And with Red Bull, they chose to go it alone with their own independent powertrain, and so far that's been working quite well too. Mercedes with their engine compression ratio, and as for McLaren, well, I don't actually really know. I don't know what sort of innovation they've got at the moment. It seems to be a little bit hazy in that regard. In the case of Ferrari, they might have found a way how to handle the car at slow speeds and from 0 miles an hour. But you out there won't regret clicking on this video right here to continue. But you out there will not regret clicking on this video right here because you will continue the ladder antics in spades. I'll see you over there.